when he got up into the canyons there east of Salt Lake, he was working on a farm that was right next to a farm that had a young Danish girl who was staying with the family, and she was a recent immigrant to America, and he met her and they fell in love, and that became the next marriage. Charles Claymore Bartlett marries Anna Kathrine Jensen, and Brigham Young sent their carriage up for them the day they got married, and he joined the church. She converted him to the gospel, and he taught her English. We'll tell you a little bit more about Anna Kathrine in just a minute. And they went to the Vernal area to live, and there they lived the rest of their lives. He was quite a skilled gardener. He did a lot of grafting of trees together. He had a lot of fruit trees that had many different kind of apples on, and apricots and pears all on the same tree. He had a lot of fun doing that. And he was also famous for beekeeping. He developed a technique for removing the new queens from the hives. In fact, it's a technique that was so well used, it had been even used, I think, up until this day. And so that tells a little bit about Charles Claymore Bartlett. Now let's talk about Anna Kathrine Jensen. Now this is my favorite great-grandmother because she was born in Denmark. That's the same country that my wife, Aunt Sonia, was born in. So I've taken most of these stories out of these two books, this little blue one called Descendants of Charles Claymore Bartlett and Anna Kathrine Jensen, and this one called Our Bartlett Heritage, written by Ashley Bartlett, which is brother to our grandmother Bingham. Anna Kathrine Jensen was born in the tip of Denmark. Well, Denmark is almost, can't see it on this map, but it's up in the northern part of Denmark. Up in that area, it's probably within 30 miles of the coast in 3 different directions. And her father lived in a little village called Mosebjerg, and it was in a county called Hjørring, and Hjørring, and that is a place where I was lucky enough to serve as branch president when I was on my mission. But Anna Kathrine Jensen was born there, and then as she got a little bit older, she moved to the city of Aalborg. Now, I think she actually was introduced to the missionaries while she was up living with her parents. I think her father and mother heard about the church and had some interest, but her father was a school teacher. And he knew that if he joined the Mormon church, he would lose his job, he would lose his pension, he would lose everything he'd ever worked for. So he would have nothing to do with the church. She went down to a city to the south of there a little bit, one of the larger cities in Denmark called Aalborg. There she worked for 3 years, and she met the missionaries again and joined the church. She saved her money, and with that money she paid her passageway to come to America. Now this time, instead of coming through New Orleans like we talked about with some of the other family, she actually lands in New York, and it's around 1862 by this time. So she now travels by train from New York City all the way to Omaha, Nebraska. So she's able to come quite a bit of ways across across Iowa, all by train. It was a very rough and hard trip, and we'll talk a little bit more about that just later. At that time, the Mormons had a lot of wagons and livestock in the Salt Lake Valley, but they didn't have much money. So in order to help the immigrants coming west, they would send young teamsters, young Latter-day Saint boys. They would drive the oxen and the wagons back to Omaha, Nebraska, and pick up a load of immigrants. And the immigrants, in the wagons, they would carry only their belongings, and then the people all had to walk. And that's the way with our great-grandmother Bartlett. She walked all the way to the Salt Lake Valley. And after she arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, she went to work for a Danish family up in one of the canyons, and she worked there for 2 years. And during that time, while working with that family, she met Charles Claymore Bartlett. Now, a couple of incidents happened on her trip west I'd like to mention. As they were coming west, one of the problems a lot of the pioneer companies had was that of disease. And cholera is a disease that is spread through water, contaminated water. You can imagine after years and years of these wagon trains going up the same trails that some of the water holes were polluted. And their wagon train contracted cholera, and cholera is a disease that kills people quite rapidly. It was spreading through the camp. The captain of the wagon train came to her and two other girls and asked them to assist with the sick, to help the sick people. The two girls refused, and both of them died of cholera. Our great-grandmother assisted, and there were times when she watched complete families die. In fact, one family, she even held the baby boy of the family and was sitting alone with him at the time he passed away. The captain of the wagon train brought material for her to help prepare the little boy as well as other family members for burial. And she says she started to work with the cloth to kind of sew them up into these bags. All of her fear of death left her, and it really was a blessing in her life, because later in her life as Relief Society president, Stake Relief Society president, and she had to help prepare the people who had died for burial, because in the early days in Ashley Valley, they didn't have an undertaker in those early days, so the Relief Society sisters had to help prepare the people for burial. Another event on her journey westward, these young men that drove the wagon train were rough-looking guys with buckskin trousers and sometimes open shirts with brown hairy chests, and the girls were a little bit timid about them, but one of the elders in the wagon train who could also speak Danish came over and told these girls, hey, these young men are good Latter-day Saint boys from the Salt Lake Valley, and they shouldn't be afraid of them. And that night they cleared off the sagebrush and they had dancing, and she says it was a matter of minutes and they all joined in. And in fact, a lot of the young ladies married these teamsters when they got to the Salt Lake Valley later that fall. However, she did not marry, but she did marry Charles Claymore Bartlett later. I just have one other story to tell. Let me kind of collect my thoughts here just a minute, and then I'll conclude with that story. So, I remember one summer in Utah, we had driven, I suspect it was from when I lived in Chicago, we had driven west to be with the family, and Amber had that summer went through all of her belongings and had kind of cleaned out a lot of odds and ends in her kitchen drawers and in her cupboards that she just didn't want to take care of anymore. And she thought it might be fun for the grandkids to go through these odds and ends and see if they could find any treasures. So she lined the kids up, and I can't remember how they lined up, by age or whatever, and they would all walk down by these long tables, and there was little vases and jars and other knickknacks sitting on these tables, and as the kids came along they picked off the things they wanted, and then they would go back and get to the other end of the line again and go through again. Well, as they were going through the line, my wife, Aunt Sonia, spotted a little spoon, and it was almost black at that time. It looked like this, and she nudged one of our little daughters and says, next time through you get that spoon. So our little daughter, I think it was our daughter Lena, she went through the line and she picked out this little spoon. Now the reason this caught my wife's eye is because it reminded her of the birth spoons that a lot of families give their children when they're born in Denmark. In fact, in our family, our children have all been given spoons and forks and from their grandparents or other relatives. Now, they don't all look like this. But anyway, after we got the spoon, we realized it was a silver-plated spoon. It's got a little silver on. Most of it's worn away now. And I can't see it on the camera, but here on the handle is engraved an A, the letter A. Now, at that time, Sonia also had some silver spoons that she'd gotten through her father. He had collected them from a family one time on an insurance settlement. But in those group of spoons, there was also letters and initials on the ends of most of the handles, and one of them had the letter A engraved on it or stamped on it. And when we compared it, it's exactly the same style of A. So we became curious and thought that this might possibly be the birth spoon of our great-grandmother, Anna Kathrine Jensen, because her first name starts with the letter A. We went to my mom and talked to her about it, and my mom says, well, you know, I think maybe I got that spoon when my mother passed away, and the belongings were split up among the family. She says, I think I picked up that spoon then, because it had been used in the family, and it was often used in the dessert dishes or the jelly dishes, you know, for Thanksgiving or something like that, because it's a fancy little spoon. Well, a few years after that, we were in the state of Washington, and our oldest daughter Lena was a young beehive girl in the church, 12 years old, 13, I think she was about 13 years old then. But one night they were asked to have a heritage night, and they were each to bring something from an ancestor to show, or a story to tell, or something about their ancestors. So I sat down, and from great-grandmother's history, I wrote this little story about I'm just a little silver spoon. And she went to this party, and she held up the spoon and then read this little story. So let me just kind of read it for you. I think it's only take a minute. I'm just a little silver spoon. I'm not very big, and I wasn't very expensive, but I do have some silver in me, and when I was new, I was very, very shiny. Look closely, and you see the letter A on my handle. The letter A is the beginning of my story. In 1844, in a little village in Denmark, a young school teacher and his wife was blessed with a little baby girl. They named her Annie Kathrine Jensen because she was such a special girl. They bought her a new little silver spoon, which is me, and had the letter A engraved on the handle, A for Annie. While Annie was a little girl growing up, I was carefully laid away in a safe place. But when Annie was 18, she took me out of my safe place and carefully packed me with the rest of her things, and we were off to the big city to go to work and to make a place for Annie in the world. In the big city, Annie was taught the gospel by the Mormon missionaries and was baptized. But Annie knew she could tell no one that she was a Mormon because her father would lose his job and his pension. So Annie kept her secret and worked very hard for 3 long years to save enough money to pay for her way to Zion. Oh, it was exciting to be packed away for the long trip to America, but it was also sad for Annie to be leaving her homeland and her family, and what about me? I could always be with her and remind her of Denmark and her own sweet mother and loving father. So off to America. We sailed to New York, but on the way there was a terrible, terrible storm. The ship rocked up and down for 10 straight days. I got so dizzy and oh so seasick. But Annie was such a good sailor and didn't get sick at all. Finally the ship stopped rocking and we were in America. Hooray, we are here, I shouted. We are home and no more traveling. What? What is that you say, Annie? We're not there yet. We still have to travel more miles. So I stayed packed away and off we went for the longest train ride ever. It was 1,300 long, bumpy miles from New York to Omaha, and we were bounced, jolted, and rattled all the way. It was worse in the crowded, stuffy railroad cars than it was on the ship, and Annie started to get sick. So one dark night, Annie went outside the railroad car and rode on the platform between the 2 railroad cars. Oh, how beautiful the fresh air was, and she slept so peacefully. But oh, what a fright she had the next morning. She looked down and saw that she was perched in a very precarious position, and that she could have easily fallen off to her death during the night. Annie knew that her Heavenly Father had been watching over her and had protected her from harm. Oh, at last we are in Omaha. Home at last, I sighed. What? What is that you say, Annie? We still have another 1,000 miles to go? But Annie, I don't want to ride the train anymore. You say we don't have to? Yippee! What is that you say? This time we have to go by wagon. But wait a minute. It is only I and the other things that Annie brought that get to ride in the wagon. Annie must walk, and walk she did all the way to the Salt Lake Valley. Finally we made it. Oh, home at last. It was so wonderful to be finally unpacked so that I could see the light again. Many years have passed since we came to Utah. Years of working, finding the right young man, temple marriage, and raising a family, and seeing sons and grandsons leave on missions. Then when Annie was 93, she left on another journey, this time without me. She went home to her Father in heaven, the same Father in heaven who had watched over her during her whole life. But what has happened to me? Oh, I've had my ups and downs. This is typical for spoons, you know. I've been passed from family to family, and today I again live in a home where Denmark is remembered longingly by the lady of the house, and even Danish is often spoken. Tonight I've been taken out of my safe place to come join with you at this party, at this anniversary party. If I look tired and maybe I don't shine so good anymore, please remember I'm only 158 years old. The end. Lena told this story very nice to the group and did a very excellent job, but it really tells us we do have a pioneer heritage